Hey, Pete, buying a house is a great idea, right?
Yeah, of course.
Wrong! My name's Adam J.D. Martin. This is the Canadian Real Estate Channel, and today we're going to have a discussion about why owning a house instead of renting might be a bad idea. I know there's going to be some sticker shock. I know some of you are pissed off and just came here to torch us in the comments. We're all right with that. But I want to make a pragmatic argument today for why, as investors, specifically for investors, maybe for homeowners too, there are some good arguments there. We'll talk about those. But for investors, I actually think it might be a great time. It might not always be the case, but now might be the time to rent instead of own where you live. Now, we've made this argument before and it pissed a lot of people off. And I get it, because again, society holds this at such a high value. And I've been in the same position, thinking that it was the end all be all, right? Own a house, that is the metric for success. It's the largest asset most Canadians have. And I understand that. And I understand the pride that comes with that. But the argument I want to make today, in the case for renting instead of owning your primary residence, specifically for investors, there's three things I really want to cover. The first thing that I want to cover is flexibility and agility. We've seen over the last few years how quickly the real estate market can adapt to changes in regulations, to changes in rates, to changes in inflation, to changes in the market supply, to changes in employment stats. And here we are. We're at a point now where there's a ton of uncertainty. And with every market that has a ton of uncertainty, there's going to be people who gain a lot and people who lose a lot. Now, one thing that's certain for you as an investor, if you rent where you live, is that your rent is probably not going to change. If it does change, it might change by a couple of %. But what you gain in flexibility and agility is going to greatly outperform the cost in rent. Because when you're renting, you have a predictable expense every month and you're sitting on the capital, you're sitting on the cash that you would have otherwise had invested. I understand it's a great forced savings tool, right? People pay monthly their mortgage. You know, maybe roughly half of their mortgage payment at the start of a term is going to be paying down principal. I understand how that is a forced savings tool. I understand as well that historically, you do pretty well if you hold a primary residence over a long period of time. You get a lot of appreciation, or you should anyways. Of course, this depends on what cycle you're in and when you're going to sell, but you should. You should over time make some money. The problem is that when you're tied down to a primary residence, you start behaving differently. You start spending a lot more money inside that primary residence on things that are not actively out making you money. And that's one of the great arguments for renting where you live. You have much less emotional attachment to the property, and it gives you that mobility and the flexibility that you need to be able to make quick decisions. And in a market with great instability, quick decisions are often made by the ones who are going to win. Okay, the people who are making quick decisions into selling, that's fine. You want to be there to be able to take advantage of that. The people who remain flexible, who remain agile, who have cash on hand, who can take action quickly, are going to be the ones who can seize the opportunity inside of the instability that's happening in the market. That's only possible if you actually have the cash. Now, for those of you thinking that you can just refinance your property or get a HELOC, it's worthwhile to think about the finance considerations regarding making that decision. When you go to refinance your house, you might have been on a mortgage rate that's 1.6%, maybe 2%. Now, when you go to refinance that property to access your capital, you might be looking at paying something like 6%. That's a big increase in your cost basis. And again, on your primary residence, it's not likely that you're going to have a bunch of rental income or some sort of income to offset the new cost basis that you're going to find. So it's rather expensive. And that factor alone is going to slow you down, whether that's making the decision for yourself, discussing that decision with your spouse, or talking with any other partners that you might have in order to make that decision. It's going to slow you down. It's going to reduce your mobility. It's going to reduce your flexibility, and it's going to tie you to that one space. So that's going to slow you down right there. And again, in a market with great instability, some of the best deals are going to be taken by those that are most flexible, most mobile, most agile. Then it comes to opportunity cost. One of the big issues with owning a primary residence is that you've had to sink in all of your capital into that building that you otherwise could have been spending on real assets, buildings that actually bring you in income every single month. When we have rental properties, we have other human beings going to work for us every single day, right? They're putting in 40-hour weeks to go and pay the rent that you have traded. You've provided them a service or a product and you're getting cash out, okay? You don't have that with your primary residence. You are leveraging the ability for your dollars to work for you while you sleep. Your rental will produce money for you every single month as long as your tenants are paying and offset the cost of the building that you've purchased. When you have positive cash flow in a building, the goal for any investor should be to get enough positive cash flow on your buildings to be able to offset your costs and purchase your own primary residence later. So I would argue that if you're not at the stage yet where your cash flow is actually paying for your lifestyle, and that means your transportation, your food, your shelter, and all of those main categories of expense, then you should at least consider challenging the narrative. You should at least consider the fact that maybe it would be more worthwhile to have your dollars working for you while you're sleeping and while you're working on other projects than owning a house for the sake of just having the pride of home ownership. Because with home ownership too, you have to recognize that there's other costs. You have the capital expenditure. If your roof goes, well, you're paying for that, right? If you have a leak in your faucet or you somehow damage the property or you want to improve the property, that's all coming out of your pocket compared to when you're renting. You just pick up the phone, call your landlord and say, hey, there's a roof leak. And all of a sudden you've pushed that cost out of your bucket and onto your landlord, which is a great thing if we're considering the fact that every single one of those dollars that you put into your primary residence is essentially at least five that you're not putting into a rental property. And what do I mean by that? Well, the leverage factor. So when we put money down on a rental property, say we're putting down 20%, that means we're getting 5 times the value, right? So we put down $1, we get 5. We put down 20%, maybe 100,000 for a quick example. We put down 100,000, that allows us to buy a $500,000 asset. And again, if we're investing in properties that produce cash flow, that means we have somebody else going and paying the mortgage on that $400,000. Think of the difference it would make if every single month the money you were putting into your primary residence went towards an asset that was producing cash flow for yourself and not just getting sunk in some sort of forced savings. Did we come to the Canadian Real Estate Channel to learn how to save, or did we come to the Canadian Real Estate Channel to learn how to invest? Okay, saving is not investing. Anybody will tell you that. Saving is a quick way to get your value of your money eroded by things like inflation. And with the current government, do you really think there's gonna be less inflation or more inflation? Leave a comment below about that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. So opportunity cost is a real thing when we're thinking about that. The other side of opportunity cost too, is that when your dollars are invested in your primary residence, they are absolutely not, unless you refinance or somehow tap the building and incur more debt. They're not sitting there liquid, easily accessible for things like maintenance, for things like operating expenses, for things like capital expenditure on your existing portfolio. Now, if you don't own any other buildings, I get it, that's fine, you're on the path. Soon, hopefully you will, and by watching this channel, we're gonna try and get you there closer every day. But if you do have a portfolio existing, again, every dollar tied up in your primary residence is a dollar that you do not have in your fund, your reserve fund, for when things go wrong in the market. And again, if you're about to refinance, you're about to renew your mortgage, and you're going from 1.6% on your rental up to 6% on your rental, and your cost base is about to massively increase, then you're going to be in for a surprise. And if you need to inject capital into your portfolio, you want to have that liquid, because the alternative to not having liquidity is that you're forced to make decisions like sell. And if you're forced into a position of selling, do you really think that you're going to have both the time and the capacity to hold on to that asset for as long as it takes to get the price out of the building that you need? I don't think so. You're gonna be put in the position of a motivated seller. Do you wanna be a motivated seller, or do you wanna be buying because of your motivation? You wanna be buying because of your motivation. You wanna be buying because you're agile, you're mobile, you're liquid, and you have the capacity to purchase quickly. And that brings us to our final point in this video. My final argument for why I think you should at least consider renting instead of owning your house right now. Timing the market cycles. Nobody has a crystal ball. It's very hard to tell where we're at specifically inside a market cycle. But what we do know is true is we have a lot of data available to us. We can see a lot of information about what's going on in the market in terms of rates, inflation, GDP, employment, days on market, median sales prices, sales to new listing ratios. We have access to all sorts of data that will help to inform us about where we're at in a cycle. And regardless of where we're at in that cycle, having more cash on hand will allow us the ability to take action on properties that absolutely make sense. And those are going to be coming up. There are going to be people that are forced to sell. And when that happens, you want to be there waiting with assets and the ability and willingness to capitalize on that opportunity. When it comes to timing in the cycle, we're not going to know exactly where we're at, but what we will know is, how does this investment make sense from a valuation perspective? What income can the property produce? What's the highest and best use for that property? What's the current use of it? How can we add value to it now? And the only people that are going to be able to take advantage of that are the people that are ready and willing. We want to take advantage of this instability. We want to take advantage of the fact that a lot of people have been put into a position where they're motivated sellers, and we want to be there to help fill the demand and be able to actually capitalize on these properties. We have a ton of immigration coming into Canada. We have a ton of demand for property, but we also have a lot of supply. So for you investors, this is a time where rents are going to be going up. All of the new properties that we can get into that make sense, we should be. And when you own your property, you own your primary residence, you're just limiting your options. So again, I want to challenge you to think about the conventional narrative here on this. Is the pride worth it, right? Is saving better than investing? Should we be dumping our money into what's essentially a big liability, or should we be focused on the assets that are going to actually pay for the lifestyles that we want? How will we retire? If your primary residence is your last thing, your nest egg, how long are you going to have to wait to actually extract that value? And once you've extracted it, what's left, right? If you sell your one nest egg, that's it, guys. But in buying properties, especially income producing properties, we allow ourselves the freedom of benefiting from the cash flow and using that cash flow to supplement our lifestyles so that your rentals can pay for that nice primary residence once you've established yourself. So I want to challenge you, think critically about how you want to use your dollars. Your dollars are relatively finite. It's hard to go get a 20% raise. It's really hard to double your income. So when we think about saving and what we're going to do with each dollar that we've been able to save after paying crazy Canadian tax rates, you want to deploy that capital efficiently. And the most efficient way is to purchase assets with leverage that produce income for you every single month, whether you're sleeping, whether you're sick, or whether you're at work. So I want to challenge you with that narrative, and I want you to comment below because I know this is going to tick some people off, and that's okay. I want to hear your perspective on this. Am I total idiot on this? Is buying a primary residence the greatest, the end all, the be all, or is it a terrible investment strategy? Let me know.